Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to this Beam Exchange Grab the Mic webinar. My name is Mike Albu. I'm Director of the Beam Exchange, which is a global platform for knowledge exchange and learning about the market systems development approach. Today, we are delighted to be joined by a team from the international NGO Mercy Corps. Three speakers in Jordan and Kenya will be talking about the lessons they've learned from the Youth Impact Labs initiative. So we have Phil Greiner, Director of Economic Opportunities and Market Development in Jordan, Khaleel Najjar, Director of the Youth Impact Labs initiative itself in Jordan, and also Jerioth Mwaura, Director of the Labs initiative in Kenya. Before I hand over to the first speaker, Phil, let me explain a little bit about the format for this session. So this webinar is actually the first session of an extended two-day learning event that Mercy Corps are running today and tomorrow. And Phil, Khaleel and Jerioth will be presenting now for approximately 30 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll have time for questions and answers from you, the audience. So please, while they're talking, post your questions in the comments section on Facebook Live below the line here. And when this is over, if the webinar has whetted your appetite to know more about the Youth Impact Labs, Mercy Corps invite you to continue attending this two-day event. So there'll be two more in-depth sessions today and two more tomorrow here on Facebook Live. And you can go back to the registration page at any time to access those sessions. So that's enough from me for now. I'll hand over to Phil.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for letting me grab the mic. And I'd also like to thank Celestream for all their support with this session and the event overall. As Mike noted, today and over the next 2 days, we'll be discussing Youth Impact Labs and our lessons learned. This is the first of 5 sessions, and hope you'll be able to join us for the other sessions as well. More information on these sessions and how to join will be available at the end of our presentation today. Youth Impact Labs as a concept is the idea of simply leveraging technology to improve and support development goals. Youth Impact Labs currently as a project is a $5 million funded project which started in April 2017 through a generous grant by google.org. The funding focused on both Kenya and Jordan, though it has since expanded to other areas, with the mission to increase young workers' income, productivity, and resilience by leveraging technology-enhanced solutions. Now, while Youth Impact Labs isn't specifically a market systems development project, the project does seek to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem, MSE strengthening, and creation of employment and growth by leveraging existing private sectors and actors and other existing structures. So over the next 30 minutes, we'll provide you with some of the most vital experiences and lessons learned, and we hope that you can use these to continue and improve your programming. With that in mind, I'd like to hand it back over to Mike to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Phil. That's a great introduction. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jerioth and Khaleel. So yes, here's the question really in my mind, Jerioth and Khaleel, is how did you take this approach and adapt it and apply it in the specific context in Kenya and Jordan?
Right. So as Phil mentioned, our mandate was very clear that we wanted to leverage technologies to accelerate job creation. And so we began by doing market research to understand who are the main job creators in Kenya. And the context in Kenya is very specific in the sense that we know 80% of the jobs being created are being created in the informal sector. And even most importantly, that they are being created by small and medium enterprises. So we started looking at how do we then trigger these small enterprises to go from creating 1 job to creating 2 jobs or 3 jobs, because we knew that that's how we would multiply the number of opportunities that are being created for young people. And so we started by very flexibly coming up with a criteria of what kind of enterprises would fit our mandate. And because we wanted to leverage technology, it was thinking about how does technology resolve the barriers of growth that the small and medium enterprises are currently experiencing. And this was barriers of growth were specifically access to market, access to finance, access to logistics, and that's what our research was saying. And we started looking at enterprises that have technologies that are actually solving this at scale for multiple small and medium enterprises. And based on that, we went out and had our first round of applications for this sort of technologies. And our first 3 were actually focusing on access to market and solutions to access to market. And one was a gig work platform. The second one was an e-commerce platform. And based on the early successes that we saw in this, we decided we really wanted to amplify this and have gone on to support gig platforms in Ethiopia and also in Tanzania. So one of the biggest lessons was, remaining adaptive, remaining flexible, and amplifying what has worked. But one other important implementation intervention that we had come up with was also focusing on the future of work and what technologies are supporting young people to learn the future of work in terms of learning the digital technology, but also connecting them to jobs. And we did not get as much success there as we had hoped, because we knew training, what we quickly learned is training in itself takes so much time and is difficult enough that to say that these technologies or this specific social enterprise is not just trains, but also guarantees every trainee of getting a job in the IT job market was a bit of a challenge. And we learned, the separation of demand creation and supply creation, and did not amplify that particular intervention going forward. So towards the end, we ended up having 10 social enterprises, 4 of them in the gig sector because we wanted to amplify those specific learnings, 3 in the e-commerce sector because we also wanted to amplify that, and also had some in the agriculture sector and 1 in the digital workspace. Khaleel.
So to second Jerioth's opinion in here, we found out that the key for adapting to the context of a certain economy lies in 2 areas, which is conducting market research to analyze the gaps in that economy, and also having enough flexibility and adaptability to be able to respond to the needs and the feedback you receive from that economy. I'll give 2 examples for the idea of analyzing the gaps. So as Jerioth said, in Kenya, the informal sector hired more than 80% of youth within the market. In Jordan, we didn't have this high percentage. So the informal economy only hired 46% of the workforce. But we found out that in Jordan, there is a huge focus on 9-to-5 jobs. So from a cultural point of view, all youth want to join 9-to-5 jobs, even though this type of full-time work doesn't fit everybody. So as an example, a university student who wants to support himself or herself with a second income cannot have a full-time job. A working mother who has some household burdens but wants to remain economically active cannot have a full-time job. So in Jordan, we decided to actually enforce the informal economy and regulate some of its aspects. So make the formal economy semi-formal in a way by supporting the businesses that acts within that economy. So that was a contextual adaptation that we had to do based on market research. Another example is that when we went to the Jordanian market, we discovered that there is a lack of business incubator focusing on social impact. So we started working with a lot of social businesses, socially spirited enterprises, and they needed an incubator and an incubation space. So that was a gap that is very unique to the Jordanian market. And based on that, we decided to establish the first social business incubator in the country called Generation Impact. And our incubator was actually from the third generation of entrepreneurship support organization, which is the generation that had a thematic focus. And our focus was social impact. And another lesson, which is collaboration with local actors in the market, we established the incubator in collaboration with one of the strongest incubation management entities in the country, which is IPAR. The last example I will mention for agility and for having enough flexibility to amend your implementation as you go is at the beginning, we decided we will work only with mature businesses. But as we went into implementation, we found out a lot of enthusiastic, committed, and passionate businesses that are at a very early stage. So at one point, we decided to also work with them to diversify risk. And the example I'll mention for that is a company called Carers, which works within the healthcare sector. So they provide babysitting and healthcare services for households. When we were approached by Carers, they had only have launched their products for 4 months, yet they had a lot of traction. Nobody supported them before us. They didn't raise any investment before us. So that looked very risky. But we were impressed by the passion and the enthusiasm of the founders. And we felt that Carers will help us achieve the social impact goals we wanted. So we took that risk. And now if you look at Carers, they are achieving unbelievable success. They are expanding outside of the country. They survived COVID. They actually thrived through COVID when people were suffering. And they proved to be a rewarding engagement for us.
Well, that's fascinating, Khaleel. Can you just tell me a bit more then about what your lessons were from working with social enterprises?
I can start off at that. And I think the most important lesson we learned is about just choosing the right enterprises. And Khaleel has talked about the risk that comes, that we were worried about when it came to, will early stage enterprises be too risky to work with, but also the benefit of just how flexible they were, how enthusiastic they are to not just focus on their own sustainability, but also come on board and align towards the mandate of the program, which was job creation, and look at even more innovative ways in which they can make sure that the jobs that they're creating are decent, people are getting a decent wage out of that. And also that they're accelerating the rate at which they're creating jobs. So that was like the most important first lesson we learned, is that we had to take time to find the right partners. And this was really important for our program design because we had the benefit of having a very flexible donor who was not pushing us to get results quickly. And compromise the design of the program, get results very early. And I think we got our first new jobs created numbers in year 2, because we took the whole of the first year in program design and in finding the right partners and in getting the right engagement with those partners, ensuring that the innovations that they're going to put our money in are in line with job creation and not just any other innovation that they would have otherwise done in the course of the enterprise. So we were really fortunate to have that donor that was very flexible, understood that it takes time to get things right, but mostly understood that gave us the leeway to make mistakes and the leeway to learn from those mistakes and learn very quickly. And if we found that a particular partnership is not working, is not creating the number of jobs we were hoping to be able to terminate and amplify other partnerships that were showing early results. So that was really important, a very important learning for us.
Thank you. So thank you for saying that, Jerioth, because there are a lot of similarities between what you said and between what we found out here in Jordan. So definitely the idea of selecting the right partners is very important, but along with it comes the understanding of the concept of risk, because as you said, early stage companies has high risk when you work with them, but you should create that balance between risk and reward and understand the consequences of taking such risk. So as an example, while it is very important to make sure that there is strategic alignment between what we want as a program and between the company you work with, you need to understand that there is always a risk of changing that alignment. So when COVID came as a crisis, some of our companies needed to pivot in order to adapt. And when they pivoted to the new business model, that business model didn't align with what we initially wanted from these companies. So at the beginning, we focused on working with these social enterprises because they create work opportunities for workers. Yet after COVID, they had to change into different models, such as a business-to-business model where they provide a service to other businesses. That does not align with our goals yet, because we understood the value of risk. I would call it actually the value of risk. We understood that this should be expected, and it's not a failure per se, because the company is sustainable. The right response to COVID was actually to pivot. Losing the strategic alignment between us and them is not actually a failure. It's an understandable dynamic that happens in the market. And in order to mitigate that risk, the lesson we learned from working with social enterprises that you need to make your portfolio as large as possible while making it efficient. That's why we selected different businesses from different sectors, from different backgrounds. Some of them were at early stage, some of them were a bit more mature, while some of them were big corporates like Byte.com. And because we were able to create that wide spectrum of versatile businesses, if one business changed their strategic alignment, the other maintained it. If one business reduced the number of workers benefiting from their services, another business boomed and created more and more work opportunities. So eventually, a balance were created because we were able to diversify the risk. Investors in the private sector understand that. So that's why you find an angel investor who tells you, I invest in 10 companies. If 2 of them or 1 of them succeeds, it compensates for everything else. So we try to adapt that same mentality of, we will work with a large group of businesses. We will give them all the support they need. Okay. If one of them goes in a different direction, we are sure that another one of them will go in the right direction and compensate for maybe the deficit that happened because of a different partner. And as a result, we ended up achieving our goals, even though some of these businesses went into a different direction. Some of these businesses, unfortunately, weren't able to sustain themselves. The end result was actually acceptable because of this specific understanding of the concept of risk.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. And another important learning was also the kind of engagements that we drew and having that blended financing, knowing that there was a place for grants, mostly in early innovation, in taking the risks, especially for those specific social enterprises that were going to go and target new vulnerable populations for the very first time, or try out a new technology, a new innovation that hadn't gone to market, hadn't been commercialized, and using that grant to whet their appetite for them to be more aligned and incentivized to innovate for these specific vulnerable groups. And I think an example for us was Moringa School. So when we came in, they were really successful in Nairobi. They had a very good social enterprise that was doing very well commercially. And we said, why do young people have to come and find opportunities in the tech sector only in the capital city? So what happens to the young people who are in secondary cities? And based on the grant funding, they were able to go and prospect, opportunities in secondary cities, opportunities in our neighboring country of Uganda, which is places they would have never gone or even prospected or even tried to go to if they didn't have grant funding backing them. But also understanding also the role of equity in creating that long-term sustainability of the businesses long after the grant funding has ended.
And that's an excellent point, Jerioth, because one thing we understood in Youth Impact Labs is that when we give financial support, we give it only for the purpose of sustaining the business beyond the period of the program and enabling them to grow, expand, and succeed again beyond the scope of our grant and beyond the time limit of our program. We have never tried to utilize this fund in order to change the strategic goal of the businesses. And it's easy as an NGO to get tempted by that. Let me go back to the idea of pivoting. So if a business pivot into a different area, you get tempted as an NGO, let me fund them, let me give them more money and try to skew them a little bit back into the direction I want. That is never a recommended practice. The only reason to give financial support to a business is to help them grow, sustain themselves. It shall never be used as a tool in order to change the strategic alignment or the goals of the business, because eventually in the long run, anybody who tried that approach ended up with, unfortunately, a disappointing failure, because markets doesn't work this way. Markets will always demand from a business to address the market needs. If a business doesn't direct themselves into what the market needs, and again, change their direction to satisfy the desires of a certain developmental program, that is not sustainable. It will never work, and the market will always rectify itself and favor another competitor over that business. So that was a very important lesson for us as a program working with businesses.
This is fascinating stuff, guys. I'm particularly interested in what you were saying about the fact that you worked with investors, which is a bit unusual perhaps for an international NGO. So could you just tell us a little bit more about that engagement with investors and how it worked?
Yes, that was actually very unique for us, because we discovered the importance of financing for sustainability of businesses, but we also discovered that us as an NGO can't be the main source for financing for these businesses. I mean, investment and investors are always a critical component of the growth and sustainability of businesses. And whenever you get into a local market, you need to strengthen the dynamics of that market, and you work within them. And again, investors, VCs, angel investors, all of these actors are essential components within the market dynamics we were working in. So we said, if we want these businesses to grow and sustain themselves, we need to collaborate with investors in the ecosystem. And we saw ourselves as a mechanism to de-risk some of these investments and encourage some of the investors in the market with matching investments and matching equity. The example I'm going to mention here in Jordan is an entity called Beyond Capital, which is a non-for-profit investment arm established here in the country. And what they do, they apply the same mentality we have, which is they present investments in order to encourage other investors to put their money into early stage companies, because they, based on their analysis, they found out that this is very important to the Jordanian market. So we felt there is a match between our goals, and that's why we decided to collaborate with Beyond Capital and help them with further financial support, so they can invest in these companies, and they can encourage other investors in the market to come and invest in these companies. And I'll mention one story with Beyond Capital that we found fascinating. So after Beyond Capital invested in some of our companies, we had a review meeting with them. And in that meeting, they were saying, when we invested in these social enterprises, we found out a very interesting result. The 5 businesses we invested in, because of the collaboration we had with Mercy Corps, actually created jobs as much as all the other businesses we invested in previously. So for them, the idea of investing in socially spirited enterprises didn't only bring the expected commercial reward that happens when you invest in a business. It had this amazing bonus for them, which is, yes, these businesses succeeded. They brought investment rewards because they succeeded commercially, but they were also able to achieve a social impact by creating a large number of jobs. And that by itself was a revelation for us. So because of our engagement with you as Mercy Corps, now we want to involve more and more socially spirited businesses in our portfolio, because we saw that new angle of additional social impact. And for us, that was a great example of influencing actors in the market so they can change some of their behavior to achieve some of the goals we are aiming for as a relief and as a humanitarian organization.
Yeah, and I think that was really exciting for Jordan. And in Kenya, impact investing, has been a mainstay for a very long time. We had the advantage of also having Mercy Corps Ventures, which is the equity arm of Mercy Corps, also having Kenya as one of their strategic priority regions. And so we tagged team with them quite a bit. But we know that almost 80% of the social enterprises that were on our portfolio have gone on to get commercial funding from various investors. And so our conversation that we start with them from the very beginning is, what is your fundraising plan to remain sustainable in this market? And most importantly, in those conversations you're having with commercial investors, what do they say you need to work on? What proof points are they looking to get in order to be comfortable to put money in you? And we worked towards ensuring that we're getting the proof points that they needed. And the good thing is that there was such a good strategic alignment between what we wanted to achieve as a youth employment program and what the commercial investors wanted to see. So they wanted to see growth of their business. They wanted to see an increase in number of clients. They wanted to see an increase in the number of merchants on the platforms. They wanted to see an increase in revenue, not just revenue to the enterprise, but revenue that is flowing to the workers on these platforms. And because there was such good alignment, all this, the technologies that we built and the investments that we made towards helping them grow, help them get the proof points that they needed to raise commercial funding. So we are really proud to have been part of their story, where they have come back and said, our investors, the moment they learned that we are working with Mercy Corps, felt more comfortable engaging with us because of the 2x increase in revenue that we were able to have in the last quarter. They are really impressed and they really want to have a second conversation. And even at this time of COVID-19, even in this pandemic season, we have two of our portfolio companies that have been able to close their rounds. And it was because we provided that support. We provided a working capital grant to help them with the COVID-19 period. And so they say, the investors were coming back and telling them, you are probably two of the three companies that we were looking at and wanted to fund, but the others seem to have really slowed down or have really been badly affected by COVID-19. But because you have been able to survive this pandemic and have shown that resilience, we are willing to put our commercial funds to that. So that's a success factor we are seeing around, and the learning around that interplay between grant and equity investment, and not having that as an afterthought, but an integral part of the program design.
Thank you, Jerioth, but you reminded me of something actually, which is the value of having this relationship with investors during a crisis like COVID-19. So I'll mention one story to emphasize on that aspect. So one of the companies Beyond Capital invested in through our partnership is a company called Aoun in Arabic. And at the beginning, they invested in them because of the partnership they had with us. But because of that partnership, they built a relationship with Aoun. And when COVID came, COVID effect on Aoun was very devastating, and Aoun almost closed. But because they had that relationship with Beyond Capital decided to invest in them further outside the scope of our partnership with them. And because of that investment, Aoun was able to survive, pivot, and build a new business that is the second version of Aoun called iForce. So that kind of de-risking and encouraging Beyond Capital to look into Aoun and building a long-term relationship that, again, goes beyond the time limit of our program, enabled Aoun to survive COVID crisis. And this is the role an NGO should play in any market, acting as a convener that connects the dots between different components and different actors in the market, so that they can continue working together even before the project ends, or even after, the project ends.
That's fascinating. I mean, those stories about the relationship with recovery and survival from the COVID impact shock is really, really pertinent. And I'm sure lots of the people listening will have further questions about that, because it is obviously the issue that is on everyone's minds at the moment. But thank you very much for those initial presentations, Jerioth and Khaleel. And I think now we should go over to the questions that people are submitting in the chat box. And remember, you can submit your questions on Facebook Live in the comment section, and we'll try and pick up as many as we can in the next remaining minutes of this webinar. Great. So I have the first question I'm going to throw at Khaleel now, but just before I do, just a reminder that if you have any questions you want to give to the speakers right now, please put them in the Facebook Live comments section. You've seen a few people kind of making greetings there, but that's the space to put your questions in, and we'll try and pick them up and answer them all if we have time. But I have a question here from Alpen Chef. It was sent in advance, actually, as part of the registration process. And I'm going to ask Khaleel to address that, please. So the question, Khaleel, is what is the most impactful problem or challenge that needs to be addressed in order to create youth employment opportunities at scale?
Thank you, Mike. So I think that would be the level of coordinated efforts at the national and at the macro scale. So I'll use one example. When we asked experts from India, how did they create this huge number of work opportunities for youth in India through outsourcing, they said we did this at the highest strategic level from different actors in the market, including government. So they would say at one point, the whole country became almost a company, and everybody acted like they are a business development department in that company. So the prime minister at one point would go and visit another country just to try to bring deals that would create more work opportunities, either through exports, outsourcing, insourcing, foreign direct investments. And I think unless we have that kind of, again, coordination accompanied by policies, national strategies, there will be not enough work opportunities available for youth.
Okay, thank you. What about Jerioth? What have you learned from the Kenya experience about the same question about what's the most impactful problem or the challenge that really needs to be addressed?
I agree with Khaleel that the macro level challenges is huge, but also what we have seen specifically in Kenya, because jobs are created mostly by medium and small and micro enterprises, that the farm level challenge is the most important lever to address if you're to create jobs at scale. And that is, from our research, the biggest challenge is around access to market, access to finance, that we found that is the biggest barrier to growth for these businesses. And when we were able to solve for those specific huge challenges, we're able to see job creation at scale.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so just a reminder again, do get those questions flowing, because we've got a good 20 minutes to interrogate the speakers about what they've been talking about with the Youth Impact Labs. So we don't want to miss that opportunity. I have a question from Ian Barney, and it relates to this. It's about scale again, but it relates to the innovation aspect. So how is the potential for scale built into the innovation design of in the approach that Mercy Corps have adopted for Youth Impact Labs? Maybe Phil, you could address that question for us.
Sure. I think the one thing that we always have to be mindful of is that there's never a sort of one size fits all. There's not a single solution. I think that the thing that really is able to be scaled for Youth Impact Labs is its approach, both identifying the opportunities as well as the solution. So for any of the activities that we've gone through, which has included some of the activities that have been discussed thus far, we've gone through a process to make sure that we are identifying proper solutions to what the challenges are. So it's always started off with identifying the critical challenges, looking at what partners within the sector that's been identified that would be key partners that we want to look at, looking at how technology can then help alleviate some of these issues, and understanding exactly what is preventing our key partners from growing. Coming up then with developing solutions, making sure that we have tailored approaches for all of our partners. So again, when we're looking at situations, everybody has something different. So we want to make sure that we're looking at solutions that are tailored to that specific problem, making sure that they're market-based solutions, creating new solutions, things that have already not been done and sort of have failed, but seeing what sort of new creative ideas that we can bring to the market, and make sure that they're sector-based, providing sector-based support. And so regardless, I think, of anything that Youth Impact Labs does, kind of getting back to my earlier introduction, where Youth Impact Labs as an idea is a bit broader than what we've been able to do, is going through this process to make sure that we can bring positive solutions to the challenges that need to be addressed.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. This is a sort of related question. So you've kind of described the approach there, Phil, but the question that we had from, again, in the registration from Bayin Mecca, I apologize for my pronunciation. Bayin asked, how relevant is the approach in locations where technology access is limited, competencies are short in short supply, and there's political instability and security is a risk? So in those kind of contexts, and maybe Jerioth, you could address this, is this approach still going to be relevant?
I think so, absolutely. And yes, we do appreciate that technology is not distributed evenly. If you're thinking of rural areas and urban areas, or conflict context and non-conflict context. And so with this approach, we're looking at working directly with social enterprises that truly understand the context, truly understand what challenge it is, and are building technologies to that are tailored to that specific context. So I'll give an example. One of our partners, the social enterprise that was working on digital learning, had a blended model. So a good combination of both offline, having a teacher in the classroom explaining, as well as having students learning some of the content online. And so that blended model was a good way for students who do not have a lot of background in terms of digital skills to be able to take advantage of having that teacher there explaining concepts, but still being introduced to the digital world. Another example, and we've seen this with all the three gig work platforms that we are working with, is the use of low-level technologies such as USSDs. Some of them were taking advantage of having service centers or call centers where gig workers, if they do not have a smartphone and are not able to access the work opportunity by getting that message on a smartphone, are able to be contacted through the call center and still be able to participate in online gig work. So we are seeing that technology is being able to reach out to those traditionally hard to reach areas in contexts that were considered hard. And we were looking at how, what's the innovative way that technology can still accelerate opportunities in those contexts and for people who do not have the digital skills. And so what we have proven with this approach is that it is possible. With the right kind of incentives, with the right kind of support, social enterprises are able to find innovations that work for difficult contexts. And it's our role as the development sector to provide those incentives that it is possible.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go straight to a related question. It's just come in from Jesus Melendez, who asks, bearing in mind that most of the entrepreneurs that Yield has engaged with have digital at the heart of their business model, do you still see opportunities to further improve digital capacity of these entrepreneurs? And if so, what digital skills do you see most relevant? Maybe Khaleel, you could answer that first, and then we'll come back to Jerioth.
So, the answer to, is there an area for more improvement when it comes to skills of entrepreneurs? My answer would always be yes. Even though the majority of entrepreneurs we work with as Youth Impact Labs in Jordan have been really skilled and business and digital acumen entrepreneurs whom we could actually learn from, everybody could learn from. But there is always areas for improvement, and it ranges depending on the business model of the company itself. So for advanced tech companies, our advice was always that the key founder, the lead entrepreneur, needs to have a certain even basic level of digital skills. even if that founder was from a pure business background or a subject matter expert. And we always tell the entrepreneur, if you don't have these skills within you, hire a CTO or a lead employee who do have these digital skills. I mean, because a lot of entrepreneurs wonder, should we outsource some of the digital functions in the company, or should we build the team internally? My advice to them is always, regardless of what you decide, at least the lead of the digital and tech-enabled activities and technology activities within the company should be in-house. So even if you outsource some of your digital functions and somehow elevate those skills to somebody from the outside, you need to have the lead within the company. For the less advanced tech, let's say, businesses or businesses that are not within the field of technology, but has a relationship with technology, we always advise the entrepreneur, again, to have the digital skills that allow him or her to interact within a digital environment. So as an example, financial skills, digital financing skills, that is necessary, skills needed for them to understand the technology they sell, or at least the technology they use. So those skills are definitely needed. We see these gaps for many entrepreneurs, and we feel that more efforts going into that area is always a must.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if you can just stay there, Khaleel. There's a couple of questions from Sumaya V about the Beyond Capital initiative, which I think was in Jordan, if I'm right. So Sumaya is asking, did Beyond Capital make a profit from their investment? I think, well, the first question was, what is the size of the investment? But also, was it making a profit? Was there an expectation coming in as an impact investor? More broadly, and since impact investing is already a hot space, what kind of guarantees was Youth Impact Labs able to make to the investors?
So I'll start with the average size of the investment, because the engagement with Beyond Capital was very selective. So the investments were made only for the top 5 companies. The average size of investment was $75,000. And for the question about profitability, I mean, Beyond Capital, for those who know Beyond Capital is a non-for-profit organization. So while they act exactly as any other private investor, so when it comes to their structure, the committees they hire, the expertise they have, they look like any private investor. But when it comes to their mission, goal, and legal structure, Beyond Capital is a non-for-profit organization. So any profit they make from these investments must be, by legal commitments, must be reinvested in strategic and impactful investments in the country, and that will go for the next 30 years. Even legally, this is the obligation. But more important than the legal obligation, this is the mission of Beyond Capital. Beyond Capital has been established particularly to mend the gap between early stage companies in Jordan and between other investors. And I think that is, coming to the last question, that is the value add we had as Mercy Corps and Beyond Capital. We wanted to encourage other investors in the country to look into these socially spirited businesses and bring them closer to them. And I would say we reap the reward of this, because we see now around Beyond Capital's angel investors and private investors are more interested to learn about these socially spirited businesses, because for them, not only they bring financial rewards, they also bring social impact. So I think the biggest value we brought to impact investment in the country is this idea of encouraging other investors to look into similar socially spirited businesses. And that has been always part of the, again, goal of Beyond Capital, and definitely Mercy Corps as a relief organization.
Okay, thank you. That was very informative, Khaleel. I'm going to change tack slightly and raise a topic which I know you both touched on actually in your presentations, and that's the impact of the COVID pandemic. So Nabeen posted a question a little while ago saying, I've seen a lot of cases related to psychological distress amongst young entrepreneurs because of the pandemic. Can you give any examples of how entrepreneurs that you've been working with are dealing with a situation, or how Mercy Corps has adapted its program strategy as a result of the COVID pandemic? Maybe Jerioth, if you can go first on that.
Sure. So we have 10 social enterprises in Kenya, as I mentioned, and they were all affected by COVID-19 in various ways. We saw the logistic e-commerce platforms thriving because there was increased demand for people to get essential goods delivered to their homesteads. And so for those ones, they had a unique challenge in the sense that the demand outstripped their internal capacity to be able to make those deliveries and to be able to process, for the e-commerce platforms to be able to process the products that were being sold. And for that, we got a special COVID-19 fund created within the program, thanks to our donor who was flexible enough to help us adapt in this way. And we very quickly provided with them a special grant to be able to increase their capacity. And that was everything from increasing their inventory, hiring additional people, the cost of getting the safety masks and gloves for all their staff to ensure that they remain safe even as they meet all these deliveries, but also for some of them to even integrate with other platforms that would enable them to be more efficient. And so we were able to help the ones that were already seeing increased demand increase and expand their businesses. Now, there was the second category of social enterprises were the ones who were seeing decreased demand because of the kind of services that they were providing, whether it was because they were very face-to-face services, and so both the workers did not want to go to the client sites, and also the clients were not willing to have people in their homes at that particular moment. And so for those, we started looking at, how are you coping? How many workers can you actually still provide work opportunities on your platforms? And for the ones that do not have any work opportunities, we did a survey to see how they are coping. We did see that almost 80% of them had negative coping strategies, and we had a special cash transfers to them. It was more of like a income, covering the income that they would have otherwise gotten on their platforms. And we did that only for 1 month, in the month of April, because that's when they were hardest hit. And gradually we have seen these work opportunities come up as restrictions have been lifted in East Africa. And for that, for all of them, actually, we have engaged a technical assistant consultant who's working very closely with all the entrepreneurs to see what does pivoting mean for each company. And we don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. We want these consultants to go deep to actually review what the market opportunities that are coming up. There were some easy market opportunities that they were seeing. Some of them could have easily pivoted to deliveries, but it didn't make sense for their business, for their core business. And so we do not want them to pivot for the sake of doing it. And so we are taking a very methodical approach to get an expert, work with them to review the market context, to review the pricing, the unit economics, to the new areas that they want to pivot to so that they can remain sustainable even after the grant period.
Right. Great. That's very, very informative. Phil, maybe you could talk a little bit more broadly about the question, the issue that's raised by that, because we had a question earlier on in the registration about how agile or adaptable did the implementers at Mercy Corps need to be to deliver this program, and what are the limitations to that agility? And I think what Jerioth was just talking about was a good example of the agility of the program. What enabled that, and what has kind of held that back?
Yeah, I think this is a common question that a lot of implementers have when it comes to being able to implement something that is very responsive and agile. Luckily for us, we had a really great partner, Google.org, who provided the funding, who was extraordinarily flexible with us in the way that we were able to implement. And I think it kind of starts from that level. If you have a donor who is very flexible, who isn't overly bureaucratic, I think it leaves you open to a lot of creativity and a lot of ability to be able to get the demand that is needed. Particularly, I think from the Jordan side with Generation Impact, when you're working with entrepreneurs as Kenya and both Jordan did, there's a lot of just day-to-day, very reactionary things that need to happen, and a lot of pivoting that needs to happen through their process. If every single time that they need to pivot, there's some sort of bureaucratic sort of process, whether it is self-influence, whether it's internal inside the organization, even if it's mindset, or if it's done through the donor, it really inhibits the way that the success of how you'll be able to implement your supportive programming. So I think, being mindful of both, internally, how flexible are you as an organization? What are the mindsets within your organization, particularly within support groups? As well as the donor, thinking through that first before you kind of dive into certain types of programming needs to be part of the framework. Because if you're not able to really serve the needs of your participants, you're kind of doing them harm. And we had some responses from some of our entrepreneurs who had gotten funding through other sort of more, let's say less agile funding donors, that because of that, they really enjoyed their interaction with this program, because we were able to be very flexible and agile and serve their demands, serve their needs, instead of vice versa.
Interesting. What was at the core of that relationship with the funder, Google.org? Was it close, a close engagement with you, or was it just kind of giving you free rein and trusting you?
I think with Google.org specifically, it really was kind of free rein. We almost needed to kind of create structure ourselves around what we were doing, because they were, I don't know if this is something that they typically do and are used to a very private sector kind of idea where they were simply investing in us, really. And we're hoping that they've seen the return on investment that they were hoping. But it really was kind of no reins almost throughout the course of this process, which again I think allowed for a lot of creativity that I think maybe wouldn't have happened in other circumstances. And again, as Jerioth noted, they were even so flexible as to allow that special COVID response that I think has really been a struggle for other donors, because it's tied to so many other sort of bureaucratic channels.
Okay. So look, accountability, in a sense, is what we're just talking about. But there's also, apart from being accountable to a donor, and you're lucky to have had a very agile donor, I guess, what about accountability to the people who you're serving through the program? I mean, there's a really interesting question we had in the registration from Isa Budu, if I pronounced her name right, Isa. She asked what input was given by youth, what participation or input from youth was integrated into the program's monitoring and evaluation, or monitoring, evaluation and learning. What innovation and adaptive learning principles did youth themselves bring to shape the project? I think, Khaleel, do you have an answer to that question?
Yes, thank you, Mike. This is a great question. And by the way, it is connected to the freedom and the, let's say, the responsibility that Google.org gave us. Because when Google.org allowed us to have freedom in designing the program, we were able to integrate the feedback we got from youth at a very early stage. So the design of the interventions within the program was affected by the feedback we gathered from youth. So we had focus groups conducted with the youth from different backgrounds in the country. And based on their feedback, we were able to amend some of the design ideas we had in our minds. So As an example, youth helped us to select the top priorities for sectors, as an example. So when we evaluated if we want to work in a certain sector or not, we depended on more than one factor. But one of these factors have been the desire of youth to work or not work within that sector. So we tried to stay away from certain sectors that youth simply told us, you know what, we don't want to go near that sector. It's not interesting for us. We don't feel there is a future for us in there. So based on we took that feedback into consideration. And we kept that mentality and that mindset of integrating youth at the different levels of the program. So I mentioned one example at the very early stage. I'll mention another example at the later stage of the program. So post-COVID, we were looking to youth to give us feedback on what has been affected them and what do they want us to do for them. And that helped us to design two small additional actions for the program. The first one was a small cash grant that we gave to businesses so they can compensate certain youth workers so they can be able to sustain their livelihood and maintain some of the life commitments they had. And that was, again, based on the feedback of youth workers and young workers who have been affected by COVID. It also helped us to do another engagement where we focused on digital financing and building mobile wallets for workers so they can, again, benefit from many financial aids that has been available in the country. So now we have a training activity where we will collaborate with partners in order to build the capacity of youth in building and opening mobile wallets and accessing digital financing tools. So the short answer is yes, feedback from youth have been integrated at various levels of the program. And this is all based on a mechanism we have at Mercy Corps called CARM, where we feel accountable and responsible for the community, and we take continuous feedback from the community, and we use that feedback in an agile design process to amend as we go and create new actions and activities based on the feedback of youth.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. And by the way, you know, there's lots of excellent resources on adaptive management on the Beam Exchange. So I hope if people listening would like to know more about these kind of tools, you'll come to the Beam Exchange and have a search on the term adaptive management. I'm afraid we actually the time has rushed by with these very articulate answers from Khaleel and Phil and Jerioth. I have to say thank you very much for how carefully and thoughtfully you've answered these questions. We've run out of time to answer any more questions, I'm afraid. But I would like to just remind everyone who's watching that these webinars, I mean, on this occasion, this was a sort of joint webinar between the Beam Exchange and Mercy Corps. And if you want to know more about this particular program, the Youth Impact Labs, there are, as we said earlier, several sessions that are going to take place for the rest of today and tomorrow. And so please, you know, come back in and find out more about what Mercy Corps have been doing. The other thing I wanted to just say as a quick plug is if your own organization is interested in presenting your work, your learning, your insights about market systems development, this this space, this Grab the Mic space is open to anyone who wants to bid. Send us a request, send us your ideas, and we can talk about having a webinar about your own program. Otherwise, another thing, just a quick favor, please, would you fill out the very fast 30-second online survey that you will see a link to in the comments below, just to let us know what you thought about today's presentations and how the webinar went. We would appreciate your feedback. Other than that, you will find we will be circulating, Mercy Corps and Beam will be circulating an email to everybody who registered with a link to the recording. So if you liked what you heard today, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can come back to it anytime you need to on the Beam Exchange's webinar page, which a link to which is there on the slide next to me right now. Okay, we have actually now run out of time, and so I just want to say a massive thank you again to Khaleel, to Phil and to Jerioth for presenting Mercy Corps' work. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions that are going to be happening here over the rest of today and tomorrow. Other than that, if you're not, have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.